what we saw last night and read in the Sunday Times, highly detailed and supported with external evidence allegations, which means that I think the police have no alternative but to investigate these allegations.
Level of investigation which has taken place over a number of years, the hundreds of people that the Sunday Times have spoken to, the hours of interviews they've done. Will the police now inevitably investigate these allegations?
I think the police have to. I think it's good that you've pointed that out, because we have seen a range of, during this sort of Me Too era, where some have been fairly non-specific and lacking in detail, whereas I think what we saw last night and read in the Sunday Times, highly detailed and supported with external evidence allegations, which means that I think the police have no alternative but to investigate these allegations. And of course, one of the issues is that when these allegations are made public, and particularly thinking of the strenuous denial that Russell Brand put out yesterday, if there are any women out there who were abused by him, then in those circumstances, they're going to feel remarkably triggered, I would think. And the question now is, I think we can say, if lots more people come out, then there's probably some substance to this that needs investigation. But if there's no more that comes out, then, you know, that would tend to militate in the favor of his innocence, which he protests so vociferously.
There are, of course, huge implications for the industry that employed him, the sheer nature of these allegations.
Yes, I think that it's recognised that at the height of Russell Brand's fame, the industry didn't deal with these things at all well. You know, this all predates Harvey Weinstein, and, you know, it's the same sort of facilitating of him and other abusers that was going on at the time. And I think, I mean, moving away from Russell Brand in particular, I think many celebrities behaved inappropriately, and as a consequence of that, the companies didn't deal with it properly. And that's why I think we've seen this watershed. That's why we've seen this change, and we're looking at these allegations of historic abuse. And I think, you know, there are real questions for not just the television companies in this country, but also broadcasters and filmmakers about how they have allowed stars, because of their celebrity, to behave in ways that we would not allow any other person to do so in the workplace.
I mean, there's obviously difficult questions specifically for the BBC, for Endemol, who knew what when, whether things were followed up or not. I mean, it really is an example of the power of so-called talent back in the early 2000s. I mean, just some of the detail, just even the simple things away from these central allegations, things like the woman who worked for Russell Brand, who talked about the fact that he would only ever just conduct himself just in white underpants. That's all he ever wore. That's what she basically just saw him in all the time. I mean, who goes to work and their boss treats them like that? It's just an example of a time that I'm hoping is no longer acceptable.
Well, I think that's right. And I think it became normalized. And so, you know, his personal assistant manager clearly thought that that was what was normal and expected with Russell Brand. And I think what we've now come to is a point where we are expecting normal behavior, reasonable behavior in the workplace, recognizing that these are workplaces and you can't behave like that. You know, and as a consequence of that, I think it's really important that the things have changed, but also I think we do need to learn the lessons. There seem to be a lot of management companies and agencies who've got lots of questions to answer. And it's not, I think, fair to focus on any one, because if any of them had called this out and raised the alarm, you know, this would have perhaps come out many, many years ago and been investigated when things were much fresher in people's minds, which of course is optimal both for the person who says that they were abused as well as the person who is accused of being the perpetrator.
You talked about the wider issues of Harvey Weinstein, the Me Too movement, how things have changed. Do you think things have changed specifically in the media industry in this country? Do you think that in years to come, we will discover that inappropriate behaviour, sexual exploitation is happening right now in the industry? Or do you feel very much that has been pretty much wiped out?
I don't think it's been wiped out. I think humans, when they're facilitated, will often go to the extremes. And I think that probably happens today. What I do think is that there's a better chance of it being called out. There's better chance of accountability. And I think it's much clearer today what is expected. Back in the day, if you were a female presenter, I think it was expected that you would have to put up with groping and sexual harassment. I don't think that is the case today. And I think that men in particular have changed a lot of their behaviours, but I don't think it's eradicated, sadly.
Russell Brand has very much undergone a reinvention, and there's a really interesting piece in the Sunday Times about that today. He promotes himself as a self-styled wellness guru. He's also a conspiracy theorist. He asks lots of questions rather than necessarily answering things. He has this huge following, and he is very critical of the mainstream media, often blaming them for all that is wrong with the world. He's very much using this narrative now to respond to these allegations, isn't he?
Yes, he is. I mean, he's got a bigger following than the Times, Sunday Times and Dispatches put together. And I think it was a very interesting tactic to effectively get his denial in first. And if you look at social media today, there are people advocating for him from his sort of fan base and saying this is part of a conspiracy. Now, we're rather pleased that if the police do investigate this, as I'm sure they feel they need to, they won't fall for any conspiracy theories. But it does mean that there are two narratives fighting in social spaces. And as a consequence of that, it's not where we saw with other celebrities where essentially they went to ground, didn't say anything, and it was assumed that they were guilty. There is a debate going on, an uninformed debate, it has to be said. But that is what is going on at the moment. And of course, we've got to remember that at the bottom of this are women who may well have been abused and will feel challenged and triggered and be concerned, and they'll be raking up memories again. And I think it remains to be seen whether any of the women decide to sue Russell Brand. Clearly, there's a possibility of suing for defamation if they say that he says that everything was consensual. If there was a woman out there who thought that it wasn't consensual, then that would be making her out to be a liar and therefore defamatory. And of course, there may be cases like Alice where that may well fall into the realms of personal injury. So I think aside from the criminal side of things, there are remedies for these women, and it'll be interesting to see whether those follow out. Of course, anything that's a civil claim will have to follow any police investigation, as we saw with Hugh Edwards. Once the police determined that there was nothing to do with Hugh Edwards, then of course at that point in time he could go on. But of course we have to say at this point, Russell Brand denies it vehemently. He says everything was consensual, and he's presumed innocent until there's information to demonstrate that he's guilty.